Hi, hello, my name is Kay Meyer. I am a reader and writer, and I love all things spooky. Today, I wanted to talk about the books I read for the Asian Readathon in May. This readathon is hosted by Cindy Pham, otherwise known as With Cindy on YouTube. Every year, she picks a popular Asian movie to pick themes for the reading prompts. And since this time it was K-pop Demon Hunters, all the prompts coincide with a song from the movie. I've linked Cindy's video below explaining how the readathon works. There's also a Storygraph reading challenge that she makes every year, and you can get some more recommendations there. So I'm going to run through the prompts real quick and then get to what I read for each one of them. Now, Cindy wants this reading challenge to be as easy as possible to complete. So for each of the prompts, you can kind of pick one or two options. The first prompt goes with the song How It's Done, and that is to read a book featuring a confident, skilled, or highly capable main character, or a book that teaches you something. The second goes with the song Golden. Read a book about a character chasing a dream or has gold featured on the cover. Third is Soda Pop. Read a book that's light and fun or has stylish, bold elements on the cover, setting, or writing style. The next song is Free. For this one, read a book where the character balances two different identities or is fighting a hidden internal struggle. And the last prompt was fun because you kind of had to choose between Huntrix and the Saja Boys. So the song you could choose was Your Idol, and for that one, you had to read a book with dark themes, or read a book that goes with What It Sounds Like and features friendship and chosen family. And I think it almost goes without saying, but because this readathon is titled the Asian Readathon, all of the authors and main characters featured should be Asian. I tried to pick books that were by authors representing different Asian ethnicities and countries, but also this time around, I really just wanted to get some books off my TBR, so we were kind of working with that. In the notes on the readathon, there's also a list of the different areas of Asia and what countries kind of fall into those. So I definitely take a look at that if you're trying to make sure different regions are represented. So for the song How It's Done, I decided to go with a nonfiction book, and that was Mistranslations, Meeting the Immigrant Parents Who Raised Me by Sopan Deb. This is a memoir and a little bit of a travelogue by Deb, who is a writer for the New York Times and also a comedian. I didn't know anything about this person before picking up this book. I found Mistranslations on a list of nonfiction books by Asian authors from my library. I would say memoirs are one of the categories of nonfiction books I've read the most, and honestly, it doesn't really matter to me if I have heard of the person before or not. Like, yeah, there's definitely some I have on my list because I know that celebrity or that person, but I've really enjoyed some that I didn't know who the author was beforehand as well. A lot of those tend to be psychology or culture-based, like with politics and such. So this sounded really cool. So Sopan's parents are both Bengali. They immigrated from India to Canada and America and ended up having an arranged marriage in the States. And part of what intrigued me about this book is that the author had an estranged relationship with both of his parents. And this book basically walks you through how he reconnected with them after many years of not speaking to them. His whole life, he was seeking an emotional closeness that neither one of his parents necessarily could provide, but he also had some misplaced resentment towards them that he realizes now as an adult was misplaced. And as he gets to know more about their history and how they grew up, he understands more about why they are the parents that they are. A lot of that resentment stems from his experiences as a first-generation American and just noticing the differences between white and brown families, but also happy and unhappy families. And I would say he's really honest about how sometimes he would conflate the two, like whiteness with happiness, but he really unpacks that and at the end is able to like really accept who his family is and where they come from. As well as a generational gap, there's also a major culture gap between him and his parents, and I would say pride and shame are two very big themes of this book. Mental health is also a big aspect of his relationship with his parents. He also kind of talks about how to include his culture and family dynamics in his comedy sets and how that kind of differs from the other Southeast Asian comedians he was around. I have two quick quotes. He said, "Much of my material, especially the stuff about my parents, resulted from unfamiliarity both with myself and with them." And then to kind of illustrate what it was like for him growing up, He also said, "The four of us lived in four corners of the house, finding our own outlets for our sadness and clawing at the outside world, begging for release." I would say this memoir has a happy ending, and the author is able to reconnect with his parents and stay in touch, but also in turn, they are better able to understand him as well. For the second song, Golden, I actually read 2 books, one for each part of the prompt. So the part about reading a book with a character chasing a dream, I could only have chosen Local Heavens by K.M. Fajardo. I have been dying to read this, and I am so glad that I finally got to it. This is a queer cyberpunk Great Gatsby retelling by a Filipino-Canadian author. So this author is also a YouTuber. I followed along with her querying journey, trying to get this book traditionally published. It takes place in the year 2075 and includes a bi-for-bi love square. That's right, finally reaching the full potential of these classic characters, you could say, from the original. It reminded me of Chloe Gong's style of retellings, where there's a whole bunch of new stuff, but the basic core meaning of the story and the characters and the plot is still there. Although there are some changes, I feel like they all fit this new world that has been created. Some of the cyberpunk elements include there's a lot of droids and what they call mods, which are basically modifications to your body that, I don't know, some of them are pretty crazy, like a little reminiscent of like the Capital people from the Hunger Games, but instead of necessarily being only for fashion, a lot of them in here are also for function. So the Nick character, he was a net diver in the war, and that basically created a whole new kind of world for World War III that was almost entirely online. And Nick is now a spy, and some of the modifications to his body are from being a veteran and what he had to do in the war to connect to basically like the internet, but like with his consciousness and fight people, but like through information and stuff. I find it hard to explain, but it makes a lot of sense when you're reading it. There's also these things called happy sleeps, which are like an even more advanced version of VR reality, where you're literally connecting yourself to the internet and experiencing a virtual simulation in such realness that you really think you're there, even if it's something entirely made up. And instead of billboards like the original Great Gatsby, there are a bunch of these hollow ads that are just flying around and are in the sky almost at all times, which, talk about annoying, but created a really interesting visual. And it's kind of like those drone shows they have now that they can put images in the sky with like the lights and stuff from the drones. Imagine that, but all the time and just with ads, trying to get you to buy things, get different body modifications, and get the newest droid for your home, Butler. In Gatsby, Ever the Extra Man owns a whole skyscraper to himself, and each floor has a different theme. They got crazy things going on there, and he has his parties just like the original. There will be a ton of people every weekend just doing who knows what all throughout his skyscraper tower home. He still has a pool though, and this one is carved out of straight up turquoise stone. And a couple of the themes that carry over from the original Great Gatsby from the 20s are oppressive doom and wasted opulence. And while this takes place essentially 50 years in the future, who knows if the world is going to be like that then, but I could really see a lot of that happening. Like, yeah, we don't have domes over entire cities, like, controlling the weather and climate, but I can definitely see how she was influenced by, like, the prevalence of AI and all sorts of stuff like that that's happening now. I've heard Chris, the author, explain that in this version, The Great Gatsby, the chasing the American dream has turned into the American nightmare, which, honestly, perfectly describes how I feel like living here is right now, with all the terribleness happening. So there you go. All that said, it might sound weird when I say I had so much fun reading this book, but it was definitely one of my biggest anticipated releases of last year, And finally getting to read it now just was so satisfying, and I just enjoyed the writing style and how Chris blended the original with her new version of the story, just meshed so well together, and she created something entirely new that you could still see how she got there, and just like the vibe and tone of like her voice. It's definitely one of my favorite books that I've read so far this year, and I can't wait to see what she comes out with next. I also read The Girl with a Thousand Faces by Sunyi Dean. This came out in May, and I am so glad that I put it on hold before it was even published at my library. And it has a lot of gold on the cover, so that fit this prompt. I learned about this book from the narrator, actually, of the audiobook, Natalie Naudis. I found her originally on TikTok, and I love watching her stuff and kind of the behind the scenes of being a narrator. This is an adult historical dark fantasy that I think kind of bleeds into horror a little bit at times. The historical part of this book has multiple timelines throughout Hong Kong's history, most notably during World War II, but then also Japan's invasion. And the author is from Hong Kong, so I thought that was really cool. And some of it takes place actually in Hong Kong, but then also some of the islands around there. And I don't know anything about that region, so obviously it's a dark fantasy, so some of this isn't actually real, but I still liked learning more about that. And so for the fantasy element, the author wove in ghosts and all of these myths into the real history. Everyone in this book can see ghosts, but our main character, Mercy Chan, is the only one who can talk to them. She is a ghost talker, not an exorcist, who works for the local triad. And in the author's note, she kind of explains what she altered from the traditional myths and legends to fit her story. But also, I thought it was really cool how the ghosts are sometimes ancestors or people who have recently died, and some deities and creatures from local folklore. So I found everything with the multiple timelines and point of view shifts a little complicated, but when everything clicks, it was like a huge moment. When I got to that part, I had to pause and just sit there for a moment because I was like, did that really just happen? And it all clicked. But it was extra special listening to Natalie's narration of it because of the way she does the different voices for the different characters. There's a switch that totally made the experience of learning that plot point even better. There's also a demon cat that follows Mercy around, and a bunch of really creepy ghosts. Some of them are sad because you know what happened to them, and other ones are just like, why are you doing that? Why are you being so creepy? I really enjoyed the like dark fantasy / kind of horror sometimes parts of this, and I just wanted to read one line that really stood out to me, and that is, be sorry in your next life. This one is over. Are you kidding me? I had that like in a loop playing in my head after I heard that. I was like, hold on. What? Be sorry in your next life. This one is over. Wild thing to say. For the song Soda Pop, I picked a book with stylish and bold elements on the book cover. And I'm going to put down the mic for a second to show you what it looks like. It is a line art style drawing of two people that are really close to each other, look like they're about to kiss, and then when you take off the book cover, one of their faces isn't there anymore. This is Permanent Record by Mary H.K. Choi. I actually tried to read this book back in 2023, and I got like the ebook from my library and wasn't able to finish it before I had to return it. So yeah, this was me getting back to a DNF. But after I read 2 other books by her that I really liked, I was like, I really gotta get back to this one. Choi's books really focus in on character and setting. All 3 books now that I've read by her take place in New York City, and it's the kind of thing where I read this book and I feel like I've been there, even though I've never been to New York City. Her descriptions of everything are just so immersive without being overbearing. And in this book specifically, the main character, Pablo, runs a food Instagram account, and it also made me very hungry and wanting to try, like, fun new foods. So Pablo, he graduated high school, went to college for a little bit, dropped out, and now works in a fancy, expensive health food store that he keeps calling a bodega, and some people in the book have opinions about that. So Pablo doesn't know anything about what he's doing with his life, and he's in a lot of debt. But then, one night shift, Lee walks in. She's an ex-Disney kid turned superstar, and suddenly Pablo knows exactly what he wants, and that is everything to do with her. They have kind of a whirlwind romance, and it is definitely a little insta-lovey, but it totally works. They spend a cute time in LA, eating tacos, going swimming, avoiding all the tourist traps, and Lee even takes him to visit her abuela. Their thing that they always say to each other is, tell me anything, because they both got a lot going on in their lives. Lee's running around the world, doing a perfume drop, and an album release, and all sorts of major celebrity kind of things, whereas Pablo is actively running away from debt collectors and trying to wrangle his punk little brother, and also juggling 1,000 commitments he keeps making and fails to follow through on. And even though Lee and Pab are like total opposites, and given their life circumstances, you never would think they would get along or anything, it really works. And I mean, I know it's fictional, but I have a hard time calling this romance. It's definitely a like new adult contemporary, and it is romantic, and they fall in love and whatnot, but it doesn't have a typical romantic ending that I think a lot of romance readers expect. Like, it's a little more open-ended, so I would just kind of say new adult, contemporary, coming of age, you know. There is a third act breakup due to some paparazzi photos, but honestly, it's more because of their lies to each other. Like, neither one of them is fully telling the truth and being authentic, even though they feel the most themselves with each other. One of my favorite parts of this book is when Lee meets all of Pab's roommates on short notice, and he lives with a bunch of people cramped into a tiny New York City apartment. Like, his room is not actually a room. It was part of, like, the family area. But Lee, she's not the, like, stuck-up pop star you'd expect, so they have a good time, and it gives you a glimpse of, like, what it could be like if she wasn't famous and they had met, or if they really decided to stay in each other's lives. I really enjoyed this book. Emergency Contact, also by this author, is going to stay my favorite by her, but this is now my second favorite of her books. And there was a line that stuck out to me that essentially is the exact opposite of what Gatsby is trying to do in his book. Whereas he's all trying to relive the past, Pablo learns about moving forward. So that quote is, "You don't get to start over every day. You get to keep going." For the song Free, I read the book You've Reached Sam by Dustin, Thao. This is a book I have wanted to read for so long that it was one of the first 5 books in my Libby app that I had saved as to read later. This is what I would call a young adult sad romance, where you know the two main characters aren't going to be able to be together because of something sad. And in this book, you know right away from the premise, Sam and Julie are dating until Sam, unfortunately, dies. And Julie is devastated until she gets a phone call from Sam, from beyond the grave. But this book starts with Julie reliving a lot of her favorite moments with Sam. So even though that's the main premise in the synopsis, when I actually started reading it, I thought, oh, okay, Sam's not dead yet. But he was. Julie is just having a really hard time with it, understandably so, and is living in this fantasy world in her head where he's still there. Although the phone calls and them being able to talk like that is very real. That is not something that she is imagining. Julie finds it really hard to fully grieve Sam not being there because she gets to talk to him every week. And she can't tell anyone that she's still talking to him. So some of her reactions are kind of strange because she knows he's gone, but she also doesn't fully feel like he's left because she gets to keep talking to him. Even subconsciously, she still holds on to this hope that they can be together. And even Sam tries to tell Julie that she's getting stuck reliving their past and she needs to be able to make new memories and let him go. In a way, she's holding him and he can't move on. They never really address that part, like what happens after, just that he's staying around and only kind of like is here when they have the calls. I liked that the author established that Julie isn't making this all up in her head by the fact that somebody else ends up having a call with Sam, because Julie recognizes that this person is having a really hard time and she wants to be able to share her experience with them, that it's not a complete goodbye yet. And there was one part that I figured out really easily, to an extent that I was like, okay, come on, are you going to figure this out, Julie? But I know this is meant for young adults. And if I was someone who hadn't read a bunch of sad teen romance books, I don't know if I would have picked up on this as fast. So take that with a grain of salt. But I really like the way the author kind of drives home this metaphor that continuing to talk to Sam is holding Julie back from her current life, is the fact that Sam is hijacking her calls. So the only times that she can talk to him in a way are when someone else is trying to reach her. So she's missing out on things that are happening now, connecting with their friends and her parents. And by Julie picking up the phone every time, it's her choosing to relive her life with Sam instead of choosing herself now. And this gets more extreme as the book goes on. She starts losing time and her relationships really start to deteriorate. What started out as just an extended goodbye ended up being all of her time. She's not paying attention to anything or anyone unless it relates back to Sam in some way. How Julie realizes, okay, this is unhealthy, I need to actually say goodbye, Sam needs to be able to move on to wherever he goes now. I did like how that was handled at the end. It felt realistic in her realizing it. Like, it did take a little while, and it wasn't rushed that she all of a sudden came to the conclusion that, oh, I need to let him go. I really like this book. And even though the whole phone call from the other side thing is a fantastical element, I felt like there are some good lessons you can learn about grief and understanding and how all that can take time. Okay, so the last book I read, I chose the song Your Idol, and I decided to pick a book with dark themes. I got a lot of those on my list to read as a horror fan. So I read Nothing But Blackened Teeth by Cassandra Khaw. I already had this book on my TBR because I really liked a short story I read from this author. In Nothing But Blackened Teeth, the main character, Kat, is from Malaysia and she's visiting Japan for a friend's wedding. This author is also from Malaysia. But as you keep reading, you find out that these friends of hers aren't really actually friends. They're basically a group of people that all used to be really good friends and did a bunch of spooky stuff together, but they've fallen away, and some people that dated before aren't together anymore, but they're all coming together again for a wedding. And they're having the wedding at the craziest, possibly the worst location you could ever. A big, fancy, old-timey estate that has specific lore about a woman who was a bride, and unfortunately her groom did not show up for the wedding because he was murdered on the way there. And so what happened? The family decided to bury her in the walls of the house. Yeah, I totally want to get married there. I love a good haunted house. But I'm not doing that, especially when the lore continues that there has been a woman buried in the house every single year since then. Now, our main characters, they don't believe any of that. They think it's all a tale told just to keep away from this big old abandoned house. The one white guy in the group rented it from some rando for some money, and they're just gonna kind of have like a bachelorette party before the wedding. The groom and the bride are there, and our main girl, Kat, and then somebody else comes in randomly. I don't know. And in this haunted location, what else did they decide to do? They decided to play the game of 100 candles, where you light 100 candles and blow out one for every scary story that you tell until you get to the last candle and are left in complete darkness. But they don't even get through that many candles before scary stuff actually starts happening. And the whole time, Kat has been like, in the back of her mind, been hearing some line of a poem that is just popping in her head, and she's like, I don't know what that is. But it turns out there's a real ghost that's whispering it in her ear. And the ghost is the bride. And she's really, really creepy, as you can probably tell from the cover. But her story is also sad. And she and Kat almost silently form a kind of kinship. And I guarantee if you think you know what's going to happen in this story, you probably don't. And I wanted to leave you with a short passage that really just gets the vibe across. I couldn't shake the idea of an eminently practical family, one that understood that bone won't rot where wood might, ordering their workers to stack girls like bricks. Arms here, legs there, a vein of skulls wefted into the manor's framing. Insurance against a time when traditional architecture might fail. Might as well. They were here for the long haul. That's it for today's video. Please let me know if you've read any of these books or if you're adding them to your TBR. Let me know what you're reading and if you have any recommendations to me based on these. I don't have any readathons or reading challenges lined up, so I'm just gonna get to some books that I have on my TBR shelf. And now it's extended to the floor because, of course, I got more books. But most of those I shared in my spring book haul video. And I am thinking about rearranging my bedroom and getting another shelf. Probably not a big full height one, but definitely something else that I can put these on. Because I go through my books fairly often to get rid of and donate ones that I don't want anymore. Also, last fall I had a book booth at a craft show, but I'm at the point now where I really want to keep a lot of the books. Like, I've read them, I've enjoyed them, I could see myself reading them again, and I've just really like kind of curated my own library to now I have a bunch that I actually do not want to get rid of, but I need more space for them. So we'll see how that goes.